If I had known you were going to be born with developmental disabilities, I wouldn't have had you. You're a burden to our family." My mother, Janet, said these harsh words, and my world went dark. "We're leaving now. It's the start of our new life as a family of 3. My father, Ronald, shouted from the car window. They left me in front of my grandparents' empty house, laughing as they drove away. I just stood there, a 10-year-old girl, staring blankly at the departing car, unable to do anything. My name is Helen. I'm 25 years old now. I have parents and a twin brother named Jeffrey, but we've been living apart for over 10 years. This is because of a past like this. When I was little, I lived with my parents and my twin brother, Jeffrey. My father was an ordinary office worker, and my mother was a part-time working housewife. We were a typical, ordinary family, but everything changed when we started elementary school. As school began, Jeffrey's brilliance started to shine through, and it became normal for him to get perfect scores on tests. "Jeffrey is amazing. Another perfect score. He's good at studies and sports. He'll surely be someone great in the future," my mother would say with a thin smile, and my father would add, "That's right. Maybe a scholar, a doctor, or a sports star. At least we won't have to worry about money." He would laugh coarsely. Meanwhile, I couldn't concentrate in class because of small sounds like other kids pulling their chairs or clicking their mechanical pencils, and I was constantly reprimanded by the teacher. I had been scolded more often than Jeffrey since we were kids, but my parents, who used to love me, started favoring Jeffrey more and more. All our meals were Jeffrey's favorite dishes, and they would take only him out to eat and play, buying him anything he wanted. I was always left alone. If I had told my teacher or any adult about my parents' treatment, maybe something would have changed, but I didn't. I couldn't. I had always struggled to express my feelings to others. I couldn't speak in an organized way and would end up sounding incoherent. Now that I'm an adult, I can somewhat convey my thoughts, but I still often say things that cause misunderstandings. Sometimes I can't grasp what the other person is trying to say, thinking I've answered properly when my response makes no sense. According to my mother, I was born with a mild developmental disability. Though I have become more capable in some areas as an adult, there are still many things I'm not good at. I must have been a troublesome child for adults back then. But that doesn't mean I should have been neglected or that I wouldn't grow. My parents seemed to think I was a child who understood nothing, always comparing me to the brilliant Jeffrey, mocking and insulting me. Now, I can argue that their behavior wasn't right as parents, but back then, my parents were absolute to me. No matter what they said or did, I couldn't hate them and just put on a fake smile to get by. As time went by, my relationship with Jeffrey, who I used to get along well with, changed. Brilliant Jeffrey didn't try to understand me, and as the years passed, he began to look at me with eyes of curiosity and disdain. "Don't talk to me at school. I'm glad we don't look alike. I'll just pretend we're strangers. You're stupid, so just stay quiet." By the time I realized it, Jeffrey had stopped being kind. He would squint his eyes in disgust and treat me with contempt. Eventually, he began to ignore me completely. Predictably, my parents never scolded Jeffrey for this behavior. My days continued with minimal care from my parents, who stopped paying attention to me entirely. On birthdays and Christmas, my parents would take Jeffrey out to dinner. I never had cake, a feast, or presents. They would tell me to eat discounted deli meals and leave me to look after the house. "You're a distraction. Stay in your room," my father would always command. My birthdays and Christmases were spent alone in my room, listening to the cheerful voices from the distant living room. "You don't need a desk since you can't do anything. It was an obvious statement to them. I was not provided with a desk or any study materials. Everything was for Jeffrey. I lost the motivation to study, and my grades plummeted further. I had no place at school or home, but there were two adults I genuinely loved. My grandparents who lived far away. Although it took over 2 hours by car to visit them and we rarely saw each other, twice a year during summer and Christmas breaks, I was allowed to join the family trips to their house on the condition that I stayed silent in the car. My grandmother's house was a rural, secluded place that bored Jeffrey and my parents, but I loved it. I was fascinated by the colors and scenery of nature. While Jeffrey studied in silence, I would sit beside him and color similar hues on the back of flyers with colored pencils I brought from school. My parents and Jeffrey would look at me with disdain, but my grandparents would say, "That's the color of the sunset," and put my drawings on the refrigerator. I was overjoyed. Not just because they displayed my doodles, but because they understood my feelings without words. My grandparents adored Jeffrey too and never showed favoritism, but they were the only adults who treated us twins equally. I lived each day looking forward to those 2 days a year when I could see my grandparents. When Jeffrey and I turned 10 in early March. Just as spring break began, my parents abruptly announced, "The apartment is sold." "What?" I was bewildered, and Jeffrey laughed through his nose. "You're as dumb as ever. They said they sold it. We're moving." "Moving? We sold the house? Where to? What about school? When? Why?" As I started to panic from the sudden news, my father's angry voice boomed. "Quiet. Your questions never make any sense. It's your fault for not noticing we've been preparing for this. Pack your things quickly." Looking around, I saw the living room was already cleared out. Since I spent most of my time confined to my room, I hadn't noticed things gradually disappearing from the house. In a panic, half crying, I packed my belongings into the boxes handed to me. I had no toys, minimal clothing, and only the bare essentials my parents provided. Packing took no time as it was just a matter of putting the things I had brought home from school into a box. "I've packed everything. It's all in the boxes now. Is this okay? I have my school bag too. I don't need a report. Just get in the car." "Okay." My father grabbed my box and roughly shoved it into the car. I climbed in with my school bag on my lap, but Jeffrey, who usually sat beside me, wasn't there. "Jeffrey's not here? Without him, it'll be just the three of us, Dad, Mom, and me. Did we forget something? There's not much stuff. Didn't I tell you not to talk in the car?" My mother snapped at me, and I shut my mouth. "Your talking is always so nonsensical. We gave Jeffrey some money to go out and have fun. Now be quiet." Silently, I watched the cherry blossoms outside, their petals starting to bloom. Suddenly, a spark of hope lit up in my chest. Maybe, just as they had taken Jeffrey out before, today they were going to take me somewhere fun. Perhaps they were only pretending it was a move to surprise me. I couldn't help but smile at the thought. While I naively daydreamed, my parents were whispering about something, but I didn't pay attention. I was too excited about the possibility of a special day. I never imagined the betrayal that was coming. After a while, I must have fallen asleep, as I was jolted awake by my mother's sharp voice. "Wake up! Grab your school bag and get out." "Where are we?" Groggily, I climbed out of the car and blinked in surprise. We were in front of my grandparents' house. "Yay! Grandma, Grandpa." With great enthusiasm, I tried to open the door, but was stunned. "It won't open. It's locked." "Mom, it's locked." we can't get in. Oh, is it? It's a weekday, so they might be at work. What? Well, I just called them, so they'll be back within an hour. Goodbye. My father dumped my luggage on the porch and got back into the car. A sense of dread filled me, and I clung to my mother's arm in a panic. Wait, where are you going? Mom, Dad, wait. Where? We're going home. We can't leave Jeffrey alone, can we? What? My mother shook off my arm and continued matter-of-factly. Jeffrey got accepted into a prestigious elementary school that goes all the way to university. He's starting there next term, so we sold the condo to help cover the tuition and decided to move for a fresh start. We want to do everything we can for our brilliant son, but with you around, he gets distracted and it costs us more money. The new term is starting, so it's the perfect time for you to live here. Wait! I don't understand. Why? Am I changing schools? Am I transferring? It's things like that that irritate me. My mother's shouting left me speechless. Since you were little, you haven't understood anything and have only been a burden to me. Your grades are bad, your looks are mediocre, and you can't even talk properly. Jeffrey is such a good kid, so why do you only cause us trouble? Am I doing something wrong? I'll apologize. I'm sorry. I don't need your empty apologies. If I had known you had developmental disabilities, I wouldn't have given birth to you. You're just a nuisance to our family. When my mother said that, my world went dark. Let's go! Our new life as a family of 3 starts now. My father shouted out the car window. I need to stop them. Don't go. Don't leave me. Mom, Dad. Am I a bad child? Words swirled in my head, but when I tried to speak, they got stuck and wouldn't come out. My mother glanced at my silent, moving lips, but quickly got into the car. Sorry for the wait. Let's buy Jeffrey a cake from that famous shop around here. With that, my parents drove off, laughing as if nothing had happened, leaving me behind. I stood there, staring blankly at the departing car, unable to do anything. Helen, are you okay? Helen. Grandpa. Through my hazy vision, I saw my grandparents' concerned faces. By the time I noticed, the sky had already darkened. I must have fallen asleep while waiting for my grandparents to come home. Your hands are so cold. Oh dear, your face is so pale. Wrapped in my grandfather's jacket, which smelled like him, I was carried into a warm room. My grandparents moved efficiently, talking angrily. How long had she been waiting? I saw the message when I checked my phone during a break. Please take care of Helen. She's waiting in front of the house. I rushed home, worried sick. Me too. I don't check my phone during my part-time job, and if you had taken your break a bit later, it would have been terrible. At that time, my grandfather was working as a craftsman, and my grandmother had a part-time job at a deli. Despite knowing their schedules, my parents had sent just a message on the day itself and considered it done. That made me realize how little I meant to them. When I sipped the steaming cocoa my grandmother handed me, the warmth made my tears start to flow uncontrollably. My grandmother gently rubbed my back as I sobbed. My grandfather, having stood up, seemed to have called my father. They had a heated argument, and eventually, he slammed the phone down. Helen. I spoke to your father, but he wasn't making any sense. Can you tell me what happened? With gentle smiles, my grandparents listened quietly as I tearfully explained everything that had happened. Despite my story being more disjointed than usual, they didn't interrupt. They said I'm a burden because of my developmental disability. They said they wouldn't have had me if they'd known. Mom and Dad are going to be a family of 3 with Jeffrey. As soon as I said that, I felt warmth envelop me. My grandmother was hugging me. What nonsense. You're a good girl. No matter what anyone says, you're a good girl. I'm so happy you were born. Huh? But a person's worth isn't determined by intelligence or looks. Your grandpa and I are just ordinary old folks who didn't go to prestigious schools, but we've cherished what we're good at and made it this far. You may not be good at studying, but you have a wonderful sense and expression. That's something irreplaceable. It's your talent. Talent. That's right. It's okay now. There are no adults here who will make you sad. You've done well. I'm sorry we didn't realize sooner. Watching my grandfather apologize while patting my head, I felt something welling up inside me, and I burst into tears. My grandparents held me until I calmed down. After that, I started living with my grandparents. I transferred to a small elementary school, where the teacher was very kind and became my first supporter outside my grandparents. The school had few students, so they tailored the curriculum to each one, understanding my nature and adapting the lessons accordingly. As a result, my grades, which had been steadily declining, began to improve and were reflected in my scores. Even my poor communication skills were accepted as part of my personality, and I made friends. Feeling secure both mentally and physically, I found what I wanted to do. 15 years passed. During that time, my parents and Jeffrey never contacted me, and at some point, they changed their address and phone number without my knowledge. As their faces began to fade from my memory, an unexpected day arrived. Open up! I know you're in there! The early morning silence was shattered by a loud voice and vigorous knocking on the door. My grandparents were already awake, and I, still groggy, headed to the entrance to see what was happening. What do you want after abandoning your daughter for over 10 years? My grandfather's shout fully woke me, and I peeked out to see what was going on, my eyes widening in shock. Well, you must be Helen, right? You've grown so much. In my memory, my mother was always neatly dressed, but the woman before me was an overly thin middle-aged woman. The middle-aged man next to her had a protruding belly, looking nothing like the slender father I remembered. Both smiled warmly and reached out to me familiarly. I avoided their hands and glared at them. If you really are my mom and dad, what are you doing here? Don't be so distant. We came with a proposal. A proposal? Ah, we know all about it. This workshop is making quite a profit now, isn't it? Dad's getting old, and he's reaching his limit as both a manager and a craftsman, right? So, I thought I'd come back and take over. My grandfather snorted at my father's words. I see. So you've come back to leech off us. And you think you'll take over? How audacious! Do you really think we'd hand over our cherished workshop to an amateur who knows nothing about glass art? Besides, we already have a successor. What? Helen. She's going to take over. She's a genius, after all. What? You've got to be kidding. She can't do anything. Before my father could finish, my grandmother threw a newspaper in his face. What the hell are you doing? Take a look, you idiot. There's an article about our workshop in there. My father opened the newspaper, eyes widening as he glanced between me and the article in astonishment. A young glass artist from a small workshop to the world. It was an article from a recent interview. Around the time I entered middle school, I became interested in my grandfather's work and started helping out at the workshop. It didn't take long before I started working on glass art myself, and soon enough, I became my grandfather's top apprentice. Recognized for my skills by my grandfather, I poured my passion into capturing nature's beauty in glass. A few years ago, I finally created my ideal piece, and when I started selling it, it quickly gained attention on social media, propelling me to fame as a glass artist. Now, we receive orders from restaurants and shops overseas, have hired more craftsmen, and started selling online. That's our daughter. She's nothing like that useless, cowardly son of ours. My father exaggeratedly praised, while my mother nodded vigorously beside him. Useless? Cowardly? Surprised by the adjectives far removed from my memories of Jeffrey, I asked, and my mother glared at me. Hear me out. That useless kid. She began excitedly explaining, spitting as she spoke. According to her, Jeffrey had smoothly progressed from university to a prestigious company. However, having been praised as a prodigy for years, Jeffrey became incredibly conceited and fragile. After being crushed by the harsh reality of society, his arrogance shattered, and his pride broken, he quit within a year, unable to handle his first setback. You'd never think he'd quit over a little scolding, right? Now, he never leaves his room except for the bathroom and bath. We quit our jobs thinking Jeffrey would support us once he got hired. Hey, Dad, we don't need to be the successors. You have money, right? Just take us in, at least the two of us. My grandfather looked dumbfounded at my father's plea. Do you only care about yourselves? But Jeffrey's still young. If we move here, Jeffrey will figure things out on his own. He's not a child. We can't get proper jobs at our age. Come on, Dad, it's a request from your beloved son. My grandfather was stunned, and my grandmother sighed deeply before returning to the room. My mother's gaze turned towards me as I stood there in a daze. You want to live with Mom and Dad, right? Just nod and agree, since you don't understand anything. She said, her eyes bloodshot, and my father nodded in agreement. After thinking for a moment, I replied, Why should I live with strangers? What? We're your real parents. We raised you, my mother exclaimed. When I was little, living with Mom and Dad, I was just existing. Grandpa and Grandma are the ones who raised me, along with my teachers. I said, continuing as they stood there, stunned. You might be my dad and mom, but I don't remember you. I won't live with people I don't know. I bowed my head. If I was saying something wrong, my grandparents would correct me, but they said nothing, so I knew I was right. Amused, my grandfather smiled as my father turned to him. Don't you think that's a terrible thing to say? Dad, say something to her. Sure, I'll say something. It's absurd to claim you raised her after abandoning her at 10 years old. No. Not to me, to Helen. Helen, say something to your dad. Grandpa. Something. No, that's not what I meant. You told me to say something, so I said something. My father, his face turning red, scratched his head in frustration while my grandfather chuckled. Don't abandon us. Dad, please. My father pleaded, clinging to my grandfather's hand, which he shook off with a stern shout. Enough already. How can you say such childish things now? My parents froze at my grandfather's voice, just as my grandmother returned, with a broom in hand. Perfect timing. It's spring cleaning today, she said, starting to sweep the entrance. Hey! You're getting dust everywhere, my mother complained. Parents who abandon their children aren't needed in the start of this new season, my grandmother said matter-of-factly, sweeping toward my parents. Go home now. I'll keep sweeping until you leave. Get ready for it. Standing beside my grandmother with a broom in hand, my grandfather joined in. Go home. It's cleaning day. Dad. Mom. Stop it. My parents cried out. Please stop. My mother shouted. But ignoring their pleas, my grandparents continued sweeping expressionlessly. Leave now. My grandfather yelled. And never come back. My grandmother added. As they shouted, my parents gripped my hand tightly in desperation. Are you really going to abandon your parents? We're drowning in debt and struggling to survive. If we're family, shouldn't you help us? My family is Grandpa and Grandma only. Your grip hurts, let go. I said, forcefully pulling away their wrinkled hands. As my parents collapsed to the floor, I took the broom from my grandmother. Goodbye forever, I said, sweeping the broom in front of their faces. That seemed to be the final blow, and my parents slumped in defeat and left in a hurry. Some time later, Jeffrey showed up at our workshop. Our parents, chased by debt collectors, had abandoned Jeffrey and run away in the night. Eventually, Jeffrey was evicted by the debt collectors and, having nowhere to go, was taken in by the police. They contacted the only family he had left, our grandparents. Those who don't work don't deserve to eat. If you're willing to help out in the workshop, we'll provide you with food and shelter. What do you say? Grandpa offered. Surprisingly, Jeffrey agreed without hesitation. While he wasn't very good at helping in the workshop and got scolded by Grandpa and the other workers daily, he soon found his place handling internet sales and accounting. His skills in these areas made him an invaluable member of the team. Grown-up Jeffrey was ashamed of his past behavior and recognized my talent. While calling it reconciliation might be an exaggeration, it felt both heartwarming and a bit embarrassing to have Jeffrey now being kind to me. As Jeffrey began to be acknowledged as a valuable worker by everyone in the workshop, our parents attempted to reach out to him. They were still focused only on their own problems, saying things like, "Where are you? If you don't help, we'll be forced to work on fishing boats. Please save us." Fed up with their self-centered pleas that didn't even mention Jeffrey, he changed his phone number and email address to cut off all contact. I wonder if they're desperately working on a fishing boat somewhere now. In the end, Jeffrey and I managed to escape from those parents, and for that, I'm truly grateful. Our meals with Grandpa, Grandma, Jeffrey, and me around the table are simple but warm. The bowls holding the beef stew are a bit misshapen, but they are Jeffrey's creations. Grandpa drinks his beer happily from a glass I made. I'm now savoring the happiness I couldn't experience in my childhood. For Zoe's birthday present, please send $500 in cash. It would be great if you could transfer the money to me electronically. Isn't it amazing how we can easily send money using our smartphones without even leaving the house? We live in such convenient times. I'm so glad you didn't have to go through any trouble for this, Sadie. I was stunned when Margaret requested cash for Zoe's 5th birthday present. Apparently, it was Zoe's own wish since she has a passion for saving money. Ever since then, I've been sending cash for Zoe's birthdays and school entrance celebrations. Margaret, Zoe's mother, always seems delighted, but I couldn't help but wonder if Zoe truly wanted the money. One day, when Zoe came to visit with her family, she invited me to draw with her. "Grandma, let's draw together." She didn't seem to be enjoying herself, frantically sliding the crayon across the paper. What she drew were stick figures and 6 circles. It wasn't skillful or cute. I was at a loss for words. "What is this supposed to be?" "Ghosts." Although it looked like a random drawing by a child, there was an eerie feeling to it. This picture held a bone-chilling meaning. I'm Sadie, 62 years old. My husband passed away 5 years ago, and I now live alone in a house in the countryside. Less than an hour's drive away, my only son lives with his wife and child. They used to visit me once every month or two, but recently, I only get to see them once a year. It's because my son, Tarek, has been on an overseas assignment since last year. I have a good relationship with my daughter-in-law, Margaret, but I understand it must be tiring for her to visit her in-laws without Tarek. A delicious steakhouse opened up near my place. Would you like to go eat there together? About 6 months after Tarek left for his assignment, I called Margaret and tried inviting her. Margaret's voice instantly lit up. Wow, steak. Yes. I'd love to, but... However, her words trailed off vaguely. I have plans every weekend this month, though. Next month? I'm booked solid on weekends too, What a shame, I'm so sorry, Sadie, even though you kindly invited me. Margaret sounded apologetic. If that's the case, I won't push it. Zoe, my granddaughter, turned 3 and started attending preschool, so they must be busy. But even after that, Margaret kept dodging my invitations without giving a clear answer, and I couldn't seem to meet her and Zoe no matter what. When I told Margaret I wanted to deliver Zoe's birthday present in person, she asked me to mail it instead. I'm booked every weekend this month too. I'm so sorry. Sadie, it's totally fine if you could just send the present. When Tarek's overseas assignment was decided, I wanted to support Margaret, who would be raising Zoe alone, in any way I could. But I couldn't even meet them face to face. Rather, realizing that my attempts to contact them might be a bother, I decided to cheer on Margaret, who was raising Zoe alone, from the sidelines. Tarek returns home once a year, and during that time, the family of 3 visits my house together. I always look forward to that one day each year. One day, as Zoe's 5th birthday was approaching, I received a call from Margaret. It was probably about a birthday present request. I had always fulfilled their requests, so Zoe was undoubtedly delighted. Last year, I gifted her a sky blue bicycle and a stuffed animal from a popular cartoon. I was excited to see what Zoe, now turning 5, would be interested in. So about Zoe's birthday this year. Just as I thought, a present request. I waited for her to continue, my heart swelling with anticipation. Zoe seems to want money instead of toys. Huh? Money? Yes, isn't Zoe quite the oddball? Margaret laughed as if troubled. She has a hobby of saving money. So, for this year's present, please give her cash. I'm sorry, Sadie. Giving a 5-year-old cash as a present feels somewhat lackluster. But if saving is her hobby, it can't be helped. I understand. Zoe is quite mature, isn't she? It must be because of your great parenting, Margaret. Oh no, not at all. Margaret is friendly and cheerful. She must treat the young Zoe with straightforward kindness too. Well then, would around $100 be good for her allowance? By the way, does Zoe still like that character? I was thinking of sending some merchandise or something as a present too. I asked casually. Instantly, Margaret raised her voice. Huh? She doesn't need that. Her voice sounded somewhat irritated, making me gasp. I was puzzled, unable to believe it was coming from the always smiling Margaret. Oh, she's already over that character. She doesn't need any stuff, so $500 in cash is fine. Don't worry about it. Her voice quickly returned to the usual cheerful Margaret. She must be troubled to receive character goods she's not interested in. While reflecting on my own thoughtlessness, something caught my attention. $500? Isn't that too much for a 5-year-old's birthday present? Yes, that's perfectly fine. I'd feel bad having you go out of your way to visit a toy store and buy this and that for her. You can just transfer the money to me electronically. Isn't it amazing how we can easily send money using smartphones these days? How convenient. I'm so glad it won't be a burden on you, Sadie. Hearing her say it so brightly, I swallowed my thoughts. Transferring money easily with a smartphone. It's certainly convenient, but it's a bit sad that this is a birthday present. Zoe, who seems to be growing up to be quite responsible, became a senior in preschool. It feels like she just started school the other day, but children really do grow up so fast. As soon as she became a senior, Margaret contacted me again. "Oh, Sadie? How have you been? You haven't caught a cold or anything, right?" Margaret is a considerate woman. I'm happy to hear from her every once in a while. "Yes, I'm doing just fine. Are you and Zoe doing well?" "Yes, we're totally fine, thanks to you." "Oh, and Sadie, I actually contacted you today because I have a favor to ask. With a slight hesitation, Margaret brought it up. "I was thinking it would be wonderful if Zoe could get a backpack as a present from you, Sadie. "Oh, Zoe's backpack. Of course, I'd love to give her one as a present." "Oh, that's great. Zoe will be so happy." Zoe is my one and only adorable granddaughter. Of course, I want to give her a backpack as a present. I didn't know they were considering buying one from the start of Zoe's senior year in preschool, and I regretted making Margaret say something difficult. "Then, I'll come over there. Can you help me pick out a backpack?" "Oh, well." Margaret faltered, giving me a bad feeling. "We're buying it from a long-established bag maker, so we need to make a reservation. It's not like we can just go to the backpack section of a department store. So, there's really no need for you to come all the way out here, Sadie. I'm so glad it won't be a burden on you." Margaret's house is just under an hour's drive away. I don't think it's a burden in the slightest. But Margaret is being considerate of me, her mother-in-law. I can't selfishly ask the overly kind Margaret to make time for me. "So, about the backpack, could I ask for $200? "What?" "I'm sorry. It's expensive, isn't it? But this is normal for backpacks these days." When I last saw the backpack section, I felt the going rate was around $50, but if we're ordering from a long-established bag maker, it wouldn't be strange for it to exceed $150. Even so, $200 is. I want Zoe to use a good one and cherish it for a long time. Please, a present from grandmother. While there are many daughters-in-law who keep their distance from their mothers-in-law, Margaret honestly relies on me. I believed our relationship was good. However, during that year's Christmas break, I harbored an unshakable doubt for the first time. Tarek temporarily returned home, and the family came to visit me. "Zoe, you're about to be an elementary school student. Did you get the backpack you wanted?" Yeah. I got a pink backpack from a girl in the neighborhood, but I wanted a light blue one." When I asked casually, Zoe's face clouded over. Margaret hurriedly tried to smooth things over. "That's not it, Sadie. The backpack we reserved just hasn't arrived yet. A middle school girl in the neighborhood happened to have a backpack that was still in pristine condition, so we just accepted it as a spare." "What? But Mom, you told me to settle for the pink one." Zoe started to say something, but then shut her mouth. I couldn't see Margaret's face as she looked down at Zoe, but seeing Zoe's awkward expression made my heart ache. Before I knew it, the new year had begun, and Zoe was already an elementary school student. In a photo sent from Tarek's smartphone, Zoe was wearing a pink backpack. It seemed to be a photo Margaret had sent to Tarek from the entrance ceremony. What happened to the light blue backpack Zoe had wanted? I asked Margaret about it, but she only responded with a carefree, "It hasn't arrived yet. It's so troubling." Not sounding troubled at all. A small doubt began to spread in my heart. For Zoe's 6th and 7th birthdays, cash was specified again. But just cash is boring, so I mailed a set of fancy stationery. On the phone, Zoe's voice was so bright, I could tell she was excited. "Thank you, Grandma. The pencils are so cute, just like my friends. It's something I really wanted. I'm going to take them to school." I felt relieved to hear her childlike excitement. When thanking me for the cash, It sounded like she was skillfully reciting a set phrase, completely different from her reaction to the stationery. "Grandma, thank you for the allowance." She didn't get excited about the cash, speaking in a mechanical way. Had Zoe really outgrown childish characters? Was she a responsible child with no desire for material things and a hobby of saving money? If not, it would mean Margaret was lying. No way. That couldn't be. I caught myself doubting, but reconsidered that cash wasn't a bad thing. Not wanting to accumulate toys, disliking character goods. I've heard many parents think that way. Cash doesn't get in the way, and Margaret must be sensible. Finally, the long-awaited Christmas break arrived. As usual, Torek temporarily returned home, and the family of 3 came to visit me. Margaret always remembered my favorite foods and never failed to bring a fruit salad as a gift. "Grandma, sorry for the intrusion. Have you been well? I've been looking forward to seeing you." A well-behaved daughter-in-law and a polite granddaughter. I was blessed with a wonderful family. But for some reason, Margaret and Zoe's smiles seemed fake. I told myself it was just awkwardness from only seeing each other once a year, creating emotional distance. I spent time with Zoe playing board games and cards I had prepared. When Zoe lost at Go Fish, I was surprised to see her grit her teeth and throw a tantrum. No. I don't want Grandma to win. I wanted to win. But what surprised me even more was that after saying just that, Zoe suddenly fell silent as if coming to her senses. Zoe glanced at Margaret, who was drinking coffee at the table behind her. Seeing Margaret paying no attention and fiddling with her smartphone, Zoe seemed relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. Zoe was only in 1st grade. It wouldn't be surprising if she cried out of frustration after losing a game. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'll do my best not to lose next time." She was a good kid, but somehow unnaturally so. Even when I gave her juice, Zoe glanced at Margaret before saying, "Thank you, Grandma. I'll have some." No matter what she did or when, it seemed like she was always checking Margaret's facial expression first. After dinner, Margaret and Tarek decided to go to the convenience store. Apparently, Margaret's period had unexpectedly started. Since he was going anyway, Tarek said he would also buy some beer. Margaret persistently tried to get Zoe to go with them, but Zoe holed up in the bathroom, saying, "My stomach kind of hurts." So Margaret and Tarek left together. "Grandma, did Mom and Dad leave?" Zoe immediately peeked out of the bathroom. I didn't even hear the sound of the toilet flushing. "They left. Did you want to go with them?" "No, it's okay." Zoe peered into my eyes as if she wanted to say something. "Is something wrong?" I bent down and asked, but Zoe bit her lip and looked away. Was it awkward for her to be alone with me, whom she rarely saw? As I worried, Zoe showed a smile. "Grandma, let's draw." Without waiting for my reply, Zoe took out a print with a white back and a pencil from her bag. She smoothly started drawing by herself. It was a picture of a girl. Black dot eyes and a horizontal line for a mouth. In other words, expressionless. Not only was there no ribbon in her hair, but her body was a mere stick figure. It was rough for a 7-year-old's drawing, and I didn't feel any cuteness. "Is this Zoe?" "Yeah. The last time we drew together, it wasn't this rough." She didn't seem to be enjoying it, frantically sliding the pencil as if in a hurry. When she finished drawing the stick figure, Zoe stared at me intently. It wasn't skillful or cute. I was at a loss for words. Zoe silently gripped the pencil again. "What is this?" Around the stick figure Zoe, there were 6 circles drawn. Those circles also had black dot eyes and a single line mouth. "Well, these kids are, ghosts." "Ghosts? I see. Are they Zoe's friends?" It looked like a random drawing by a 3-year-old, but it had a strange, eerie feeling. "They're not friends. These kids are my family." Zoe gave me a look as if testing me. Was it just the delusion of a young child? It seemed like it would be good to gently pat her head and say, "Oh, they're your family." But Zoe's direct gaze made me freeze. "Grandma." It seemed like she was trying to appeal to me. As I stared at the rough drawing, almost as if being sucked into it, a dark thought suddenly surfaced. Huh? Could this be? Could this drawing be Zoe's SOS? It's okay. Grandma is on your side, Zoe. If there's something troubling you, please tell Grandma. Zoe, who was always a polite, good girl, now glared at me with a guarded look, like a stray dog unaccustomed to people. I felt like I was being tested. I felt a sense of dread, but I never looked away from Zoe. And then, Zoe finally opened her mouth. "Grandma, help me." The moment she said those words, Zoe's eyes filled with tears. She seemed to have been trying to determine if I was an adult she could rely on. At 7 years old, she should have been innocent, but it pained me to think that she had to be suspicious even of her own grandmother. "Okay, I understand. Can you tell Grandma what happened?" Zoe spoke while desperately holding back her overflowing tears. "Mom has someone she likes other than Dad. But that person said they would drag Mom down to hell. That's why I... But Grandma, what should I do?" Her voice choked up, and her words were sometimes broken. Still, she managed to convey the unbelievable truth to me. "No way, that's..." My tone inadvertently grew stronger. Zoe shrunk back. "I'm sorry." Even though Zoe did nothing wrong, she cowered just because my voice got louder. The fact that she apologized on reflex made me realize that Zoe was not living a childlike life. I hugged the small Zoe tightly and reassured her, "It's okay, it's okay. Zoe is a smart girl." After crying a little in my arms, she gently checked the clock on the wall and wiped her tears. "Mom and Dad will be back soon." Having switched gears, as soon as Margaret and the others returned home, Zoe immediately crawled into her futon, saying, "I got sleepy. I got sleepy." It was to hide her red, swollen eyes. "Do you want to sleep with Grandma?" I asked, wanting to hear more, but Margaret stopped me. "Oh, come on, Sadie. Zoe is already an elementary school student. It's embarrassing for her to sleep with Grandma." She laughed and sought Zoe's agreement. "Right, Zoe? It's embarrassing, isn't it?" "Yeah, I'm an elementary school student, so I'll sleep alone." She seemed like a wonderful mom who understood Zoe well. I had believed that without a doubt until now. But now, for some reason, I felt a strong pressure from her. Come to think of it, Margaret was a bit overprotective and never left Zoe's side. Yet, she didn't seem interested in Zoe. I just felt like she was worried about Zoe saying anything unnecessary. The next day, even though she was next to Zoe and me while we were drawing, her eyes were glued to her smartphone, and she didn't say a word to us. "Zoe, you're good at drawing." "Thank you. I love drawing." We had occasional idle conversations like that, and before I knew it, 2 hours had passed. It meant that Margaret had been looking only at her smartphone for 2 hours without paying attention to Zoe. I was surprised at how quickly time had flown by, but I felt an indescribably unpleasant emotion, not quite surprise or anger, at Margaret's attitude of being so naturally indifferent to Zoe. But it was convenient for me to spend time with Zoe at a leisurely pace. By the way, I had asked Tarek to run an errand, so he was out. Zoe and I turned our backs to Margaret and filled sheet after sheet of white paper with drawings. Tarek and the others were planning to stay one more night, but apparently, Tarek had to return to his post urgently. They hurriedly left my house. "Grandma, see you again." Zoe waved her hand modestly. Margaret's face seemed to say she was lucky to be able to cut the troublesome visit short. "Oh, what a shame. I wanted to enjoy more of Sadie's delicious cooking." "Margaret, you're good at flattery." "Oh, stop it. It's not flattery at all. Margaret really has a way with words. If I hadn't had that conversation with Zoe, I would have still believed Margaret was a good person. But now her smile seems cheap, like a mask." I swore to myself that I would absolutely tear off that mask. With a beaming smile, I saw Tarek and the others off. Zoe looked back anxiously, but she didn't need to worry. We would see each other again soon. The next day, just past noon, Tarek apparently headed to the airport alone. The only ones left in their apartment were Margaret and Zoe. "Zoe, Mommy's friend is coming over to play today. He's a very important friend, so you'd better be on your best behavior, okay?" Margaret seemed to be in high spirits, visible through a certain screen. She was busy fixing her appearance, curling her hair and reapplying mascara. After a while, the intercom rang. Margaret ran to the front door without checking who the visitor was. "I've been waiting for you," she greeted her so-called friend with a voice full of delight. As soon as her male friend Carl entered the room, he leered at Zoe with a sleazy grin. "Zoe, let's get along well, okay?" Zoe glared at the man with defiant eyes. The man maintained his smile and pretended to be her friend in an exaggerated manner. "Zoe, don't make such a scary face. I'm your mommy's friend, you know? Let's have some fun together." He approached Zoe with a gentle tone. But his voice suddenly dropped low, threatening Zoe. "How long are you going to keep making that face? If you don't try hard, your mommy will fall into hell, you know? Do you understand? You'll be the one pushing your mommy down." Zoe's body trembled slightly. "So, shall we play together?" "Isn't that great, Zoe? Go play with Carl." "Oh, wait, $300 up front. Ha, you don't miss a thing." I couldn't stay silent and watch anymore. I pushed open the closet door where I had been hiding and ran into the living room where Zoe was waiting. "What are we playing? Let Grandma join in too." Zoe was sitting with her knees hugged to her chest, as if protecting herself. As soon as she saw me, her tense expression softened, and she ran over to me. Margaret couldn't grasp the situation and could only look back and forth between Carl and me in bewilderment. "Huh? What? Why?" It was only natural for her to be surprised when her mother-in-law, who shouldn't have been there, suddenly appeared in her home. Margaret seemed to be simply dumbfounded, not even feeling anger yet. "Who's this old hag?" "I'm not an old hag. I'm Zoe's grandmother. Now, mister, what shall we play? House? Drawing, perhaps?" The man took a step back, distancing himself from me. He was perplexed by the intrusion of a seemingly crazy old woman. I embraced the shoulders of Zoe, who was clinging to my legs, and gave her the gentlest smile I could muster. Then I raised my gaze and instantly wiped the smile off my face. I leaned in close to Carl's face and stared into his eyes with a piercing gaze. "Or were you planning to involve a child in adult games?" I took out a few sheets of paper from the bag I was holding. They were densely filled with writing. While visiting my home, Zoe and I pretended to be drawing, but we were actually conversing through writing the entire time. Zoe had been telling me about her situation through written words. Margaret never peeked in and asked, "What kind of picture are you drawing?" So Zoe and I conversed earnestly through writing. We didn't have a chance to be alone, but as long as we didn't make a sound, we wouldn't get caught. I relentlessly confronted the bewildered Margaret and the man, paying no heed to their confusion. "Zoe told me that she was threatened, saying if she didn't play with this man, her mom would go to hell." Even though he said play, Zoe could sense it wasn't going to be pure, innocent play, even if she didn't fully understand. So she was scared and didn't want to play, but if she didn't play with him, her mom would suffer a terrible fate. Carrying this unknown terror, Zoe had been worrying all this time. "Margaret, can you explain in detail what this is about?" Margaret's eyes darted all over, up, down, left, and right, desperately seeking an excuse. Her usual aura of being a good person was gone. She stuttered out a response. "Huh? No, I mean, it's just normal playing house, right? You'll go to hell if you don't play house? What? Oh, no, I don't remember saying anything like that. I mean, is Zoe telling some weird lie or something?" Margaret tried to play dumb. First of all, the very fact that I was here meant there was no way I would let her make excuses. By the way, I've been in this house for the past few hours. I've been listening the whole time. Watching the whole time. As I slowly informed her, Margaret turned pale. No matter if I was her mother-in-law, it must have been terrifying to find out I had intruded without her knowledge. That's a lie! There's no way! Margaret looked frightened, as if she were the victim, but she was by no means a victim. The one who's unbelievable is you. After Tarek left the house, you were on the phone with this man, right? I heard that too. Margaret and Carl furrowed their brows and looked at each other. I quietly urged Zoe to go to another room. The clever Zoe silently obeyed. Now I could corner them without holding back. You were planning to sell Zoe for $300, weren't you? I don't know anything about that. Margaret hastily denied it. So I fired back without missing a beat. I have a recording. What? Immediately after seeing off Tarek, who was returning to his overseas post, Margaret gleefully started making a phone call. The contents were so cruel, it made me want to cover my ears. Even without listening to the recording, Margaret's voice replayed in my head. Hey, Tarek went back overseas. Come by Zoe right away. You'll give me the $300, right? You promise? This will pay off my debt, right? Oh, and don't get serious with a kid, okay? I'm the one you really want, right? A mom selling her own daughter to pay off debts. Witnessing that nearly made me stop breathing. I had to suppress the urge to rush out immediately and save Zoe. And so, I had waited for this moment when she couldn't make excuses. I pointed to Margaret's pocket. The envelope in your pocket, what's inside? An envelope she had hurriedly stuffed into her pocket when I appeared. It was handed to Margaret by the man. I happened to be checking the contents at the time, so I could see several $100 bills peeking out. Huh? I don't know. It was impossible for her to feign ignorance. I sighed and informed her again. I have a recording, and I was also filming, you know? What? Feeling dizzy, Margaret staggered on her feet. I would never forgive Margaret for making Zoe suffer. Tears streamed down Margaret's cheeks as she held her head in her hands. She started to plead, shedding tears little by little. Sadie, it's not what you think. No, I was wrong. I'm sorry. The truth is, I have debts, so I had no choice but to offer up Zoe. I really made a mistake. I'm sorry. Realizing she couldn't deceive me anymore, Margaret tried to win me over with tears. The one she should be apologizing to wasn't me, but Zoe. She probably just wanted to sweep this painful situation under the rug. The debts, what did you rack them up for? Like brand name stuff? I took a look around the room. There were no visible brand name items, and neither the room nor Margaret herself seemed very flashy. Tell me the truth. Well, you see, Margaret stammered. As I waited for a response, a voice rang out from behind me. It's for hospital bills. It was Zoe. She stood straight, with a resolute expression on her face. I had made her wait in another room, but she must have been eavesdropping. Unable to hold back any longer, she had rushed out. It's for hospital bills, right, Mom? Zoe and I locked our eyes on Margaret, not letting her out of our sight. Margaret's face contorted in anguish, and her legs trembled slightly. Eventually, she stomped on the floor loudly with her right foot. I embraced Zoe, whose body had stiffened, shielding her. Ugh, fine. It's for hospital bills, so what? They're hospital bills, so it can't be helped. Then, Sadie, if you think Zoe is so pitiful, why don't you pay the $300? Whenever I ask you for money, you always seem reluctant. That's why I had no choice but to sell Zoe. It's your fault for being stingy. Margaret's true nature was revealed. The mom who had been agonizing over whether she should sacrifice Zoe to protect herself screamed in a shrill voice like a child throwing a tantrum. Zoe silently watched her mom's ugly behavior. "The money I gave you for Zoe's birthdays and backpack, you were using it for yourself after all. Is it so wrong for a parent to manage the money? It is wrong," I clearly stated to Margaret, who was brazenly joking around. Margaret, who had been grinning hatefully, shut her mouth. "If you had told me from the start that it was for hospital bills, I would have given you the money. But you were going to the hospital for a reason you couldn't honestly say, right?" This time, Margaret sulked and didn't say a word. She was more childish than 7-year-old Zoe. Living thoughtlessly, following her own desires, had she become completely selfish? "The hospital, it was an OB/GYN clinic, wasn't it? To erase the life growing in your belly." The stick figure and 6 circles Zoe had drawn. The 6 circles represented the lives that had disappeared. If I had seen that drawing and felt nothing or gotten angry, I think Zoe would have kept her mouth shut. Because I tried to understand what it meant and to know Zoe's feelings, she acknowledged me as an adult she could trust and rely on. "Grandma, they're my little brothers and sisters. You can't see them, but they haven't disappeared." "That's right. I'm sorry, Zoe." Zoe turned to face Margaret and quietly asked, "Don't tell me that if I'm not a good girl, Mom will go to hell to be with my little brothers?" In fact, it seems Margaret had been leaving Zoe behind and going out to have fun on a regular basis. Taking advantage of Tarek's overseas assignment, she had been fully enjoying the single life. She would only return home in the morning or evening to give Zoe a boxed lunch or cup noodles. But Margaret had a good public image, so she properly participated in school events, and their family was not recognized as having problems. While Margaret was mostly out like this, there were times when she would stay home for about a week. At those times, I was happy to have Mom with me all the time, but Mom was in really bad shape and irritable. When I tried to approach her to talk, she said, "I'm tired from just giving birth to your little brother or sister." She said it costs a lot of money to have a baby. So, when I asked where the baby was, Zoe bit her lip. I had heard before how Margaret answered at that time. "Who knows? In hell, I guess." When Zoe told me this, she couldn't hold back her tears and let them overflow. She had been stifling her voice so Margaret wouldn't notice, playing around casually and treating the life she was blessed with carelessly for selfish reasons. It's not a forgivable act. Moreover, according to Zoe, this had happened 6 times. "Mom, I may not be a good girl right now, but please, please don't say that I will go to hell to be with my little brothers there. I really, really hate that. Because my little brothers aren't in hell." Clenching her small fists, Zoe desperately pleaded. And then, she screamed with all her might. "If you want to go to hell, go by yourself, Mom." The obedient Zoe had rebelled for the first time. Margaret staggered backward as if she had been hit in the head. "Zoe! I am your mom. Don't talk to me that way." "I know. My friends' moms stay at home, make meals for them, and chat with them. Some moms are busy with work, but none of them are busy getting friendly with men like you." Only 7 years old, Zoe, a first grader, was thinking much more like an adult than Margaret. "Huh? Don't mess with me." Margaret's eyes narrowed, rapidly filling with hatred. She vigorously raised her fist, with veins popping out. Or so I thought, but Margaret's arm dropped limply. Eventually, all the strength drained from her body, and she slumped down onto the floor. "Tarek! Why are you here?" When I turned around, Tarek was standing behind me. Margaret had abruptly lost her momentum when she noticed him. "You're supposed to be gone. Wait, this isn't making any sense. Why are you here?" Tarek said to the confused Margaret in a flat voice. "Is it weird for me to be in my own home? More importantly, isn't it weirder for a strange man to be here? Carl, who had been called a strange man, had completely blended into the background, so he jumped up in surprise. "What were you planning to do with Zoe?" Even when spoken to, Carl still pretended to be part of the background and held his breath. He didn't pick a fight or try to run away. He seemed quite timid. "If you don't want to answer, that's fine. You can tell the rest to the police." "What? Why are you surprised? You tried to buy a 7-year-old child for $300, didn't you?" The man mumbled. "Well, it was just an attempt." While stammering, Tarek strode up to Carl and grabbed him by the collar. "I don't want to hear excuses. Get lost." If Tarek hadn't been grabbing his collar, the man's legs were shaking so much he wouldn't have been able to stand. The sound of the front door opening was heard, and 2 police officers barged in unceremoniously. The man was arrested on the spot. His legs were frozen, and he couldn't walk, so the police officers grabbed him by both arms and took him away like a captured alien. Why the police? Did you call them? Why is this happening?" Tarek explained to the bewildered Margaret, with a terribly cold expression. "It was a lie that I had to suddenly return to my post. After hearing about Zoe from Mom, I deliberately left the house empty to confirm the truth." Although Zoe, a child, may not have had a definite grasp of the facts, it didn't seem like a lie or misunderstanding. When I secretly told Tarek, he said he actually had some suspicions. Sometimes Margaret would withdraw $2,000 or $3,000 from savings at once, and when he tried to video call, she almost never answered. Zoe didn't consult Tarek because Margaret had been telling her, "Don't tell Dad or the teacher about what happens at home." That's not true. I was just deceived by Carl. I was actually protecting Zoe. Really? I was going to try my best to only let him take a few photos. Margaret clung weakly to Tarek. Even seeing Margaret's tears, Tarek was completely unmoved. On the contrary, he openly showed his disgust and looked down on Margaret. "I didn't know Margaret was such a foolish human being." "I just told you earlier. Did you already forget? I said I was recording audio and video." I pointed to the smartphone propped up on the shelf in the living room. Tarek had set up one he used to use in advance. By connecting it to a video call, Tarek and I could check the interior in real time. Of course, we were also recording video. "I heard you on the phone with that man too. You said he could do whatever he wanted with Zoe." "Oh, no, that's not true." First of all, I couldn't have waited inside the house without Tarek's cooperation. Margaret let out a voiceless, She reached out to Tarek but was strongly brushed off. Undeterred, she turned her hand toward Zoe. However, even Zoe avoided her with a sharp look. Abandoned by her family, Margaret pursed her lips and looked up at the heavens. Then, the police officers from earlier returned. The hand that her family wouldn't hold was taken by the police officer. "Huh? Why are the police taking me?" "Margaret, you did something that required the police's attention too." She had tried to make a child do something inappropriate. Even if it ended in an attempt, it was unforgivable. "Huh, why, no, Zoe." As Margaret was being taken away by the police, Zoe asked, "Mom, are you going to hell?" "What? No, I don't want to go to hell." The police officers tightly restrained Margaret, who had started making a commotion, and dragged her away without mercy. "No! Let me go! I don't want to go!" Margaret was making a huge fuss like a disobedient child. Eventually, her voice faded away, and when I looked outside, the police car had driven off. I later heard that Margaret had indeed been cheating, feeling like she was single. Thinking Tarek, who was on an overseas assignment, would never find out, she had been boldly playing around and apparently had repeated unwanted pregnancies. Since the incident with Zoe ended in an attempt, Margaret and the man were given a suspended prosecution. The man wasn't serious about Margaret, but he thought it was rather lucky when she occasionally got pregnant. He would have her examined by a doctor he knew, overcharge her more than the going rate, and he could receive kickbacks. That's why I was never really serious from the bottom of my heart. It was just for fun. I'm so sorry. The deeper the man's apology, the more miserable Margaret seemed. On the other hand, Margaret and Tarek got divorced. She cried and protested, but someone who tries to sell their daughter has no right to refuse. Contact with Zoe was also prohibited. At the time of the arrest, she had been screaming and crying so much that someone must have filmed it, and without our knowledge, she had become a topic on social media as the wailing old hag. Even though we never spread rumors, somehow not only Margaret's name but also the reason for her arrest had spread. The internet world is scary. After the divorce, Margaret tried to come and contact Zoe, but the neighbors immediately reported her, so nothing came of it. I heard rumors that Margaret felt like she was constantly being watched both in the online world and in the real world, and she had become terribly self-conscious and was suffering from mental instability. Since Tarek had to return overseas, I took care of Zoe for a while. As if the long time we couldn't see each other had been a lie, Zoe and I got along well and had endless conversations. You know, this happened and then this happened. See? Grandma. Zoe kept talking, her words overflowing, sometimes saying incoherent things. Maybe she wasn't as level-headed as I thought. But even the chatty Zoe was childlike and adorable. After a while, Zoe left to go overseas to Tarek's post. The lively and fun times passed in the blink of an eye, and the room I surveyed felt spacious. About 3 months after Zoe had gone overseas, a letter arrived in the mailbox. It was from Zoe. Surprisingly, it was written in French. I pulled out a dusty French-English dictionary and took my time reading the letter. Although there were some mistakes here and there, I was happy to see that Zoe was also working hard overseas. That's it. I'll learn French. It would be so much fun to be able to chat with Zoe in French. Even in my 60s, it seems I can still find things I want to do and dreams to pursue. When I can speak French, I'll go visit Tarek and surprise him. With a goal in mind, the little loneliness that had remained in my heart quietly disappeared. Right now, I'm imagining a bright future, my heart swelling with anticipation.